Joe Rogan is a comedian, actor, martial artist, and highly successful podcast host. But more importantly, he has played a crucial role in building the sport, and here's why Joe Rogan is so significant to the UFC. The Fear Factor Guy. Rogan has come a long way from being known as the guy who hosts Fear Factor to one of America's most influential podcasters. But for hardcore martial arts fans, Rogan will forever be known as the most iconic voice of the UFC. As a martial arts fan and competitor for most of his life, Rogan followed the Ultimate Fighting Championship from its infancy. He started working for the company in 1997 as a post-fight interviewer, a role that Megan O'Leary and Laura Sanko have been filling in the modern era. After a few years of working things out with the UFC, Rogan finally started calling fights in 2002. Game-changing impact. Today, Rogan is synonymous with the UFC brand. Some may even argue that he's as significant a figure to the company as the likes of Dana White and Conor McGregor. That's a little nuts, considering Rogan doesn't really influence what happens inside the octagon and what goes on behind the scenes. But when you think about it, it's extremely difficult to imagine a world where the UFC gets to where it is today without good old Joe to provide his unique style of commentary. Rogan is generally respected and beloved by UFC fans and fighters. Even Dana White has given him credit for helping the company grow into the industry giant that it is today. UFC's biggest mouthpiece. Rogan's enthusiasm for the sport also shines through in the broadcasts. His memorable one-liners like, take the experience of watching UFC fights to another level. Simply put, his energy is just infectious. Nowadays, Rogan is no longer present at every UFC event. His appearances are only reserved for pay-per-views and special occasions. He spends most of his time running his ultra-popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, and touring for his stand-up comedy shows. But that's not necessarily a bad thing for the UFC. Rogan's podcast averages 11 million listeners per episode, making it one of the most popular podcasts on Earth. From time to time, Rogan would have UFC fighters as guests to have in-depth discussions with them. And that is massive for the UFC as far as promotion is concerned. Not only does it expose the company to the potential 11 million listeners, but they don't even have to pay Rogan to hype up the fights. Voice of the UFC. Today, the UFC benefits from having retired MMA fighters like Daniel Cormier, Michael Bisping, and Paul Felder, as they provide their insights into what actually takes place inside the cage. These guys are extremely knowledgeable, as they've practically been in every possible scenario that could take place in an MMA fight. But during the early days, no one had the knowledge or expertise that Joe Rogan had, and that's precisely why Rogan had to fill in the blanks, making him irreplaceable. His ability to break down Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu action helped casual viewers understand what was happening when a fight was being contested on the ground. Rogan may not have fought in a sanctioned MMA fight, but his experience as a lifelong martial artist lends itself to do the job. His knowledge came in handy to tutor casual fans, and his immense contribution had turned him into a true pioneer of MMA. Today, Rogan gets flack from fans who believe he's no longer in his prime when it comes to commentating. Understandably, Rogan no longer follows the sport as closely as he once did. This leads to embarrassing bloopers, like getting a fighter's name wrong or misremembering the results of previous fights. Still, it's undeniable that Rogan has been part of several UFC moments we remember fondly. There will come a time when you tune into a UFC pay-per-view and Joe Rogan is no longer around to lend us his voice and insights. Fortunately, that day isn't coming anytime soon.